I don't always read that. People are very willing to tell me that, but I don't think I am. I'm affectious with myself.
27 years after Diana was buried, the tomb was opened, and what was inside rewrote everything. The evidence they found had been there all along, waiting. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why the most powerful people in Britain needed you to never find out. The decision that shook the establishment. There are moments in history that arrive not with thunder, but with paperwork, a quietly filed motion, a commission convened behind closed doors, a press release written so carefully that its most important sentence is the one it leaves out entirely. The decision to re-examine the circumstances surrounding the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, was exactly that kind of moment. And when word began to spread in the spring of 2025, the reaction from every corner of the British establishment told you everything you needed to know about how much was still at stake. 27 years had passed since that tunnel in Paris changed everything. An entire generation had grown up knowing Diana only through photographs, documentary footage, and the kind of grief that gets handed down through families like an heirloom nobody asked for. The world had moved on, or at least it had tried to, but the questions had never moved on. They had simply gone quiet, carried forward in the memories of people who were there, in the files of journalists who never stopped pulling at threads. The decision did not come from a single act of political courage. Nothing this significant ever does. It came from accumulation. It came from years of freedom of information, requests that had slowly and reluctantly begun to yield documents that raised more questions than they answered. It came from forensic advancements that made certain analyses possible in 2025 that simply did not exist in 1997. And it came from a new generation of investigators who had no personal stake in the conclusions of the original inquiry and no institutional loyalty to protect. The authorization came through a formal joint commission established under the oversight of a senior parliamentary body and operating with the cooperation of French judicial authorities. This was necessary because Diana's death had occurred on French soil, inside the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris, on the 31st of August, 1997. The process required months of negotiation between British and French officials. An independent forensic panel was appointed, its members selected specifically for their distance from the events of 1997 and their freedom from any institutional loyalty. The commission was not tasked with relitigating the entirety of Operation Paget, the Metropolitan Police investigation that concluded in 2006. That report had run to more than 800 pages and delivered a finding of unlawful killing by grossly negligent driving. Instead, this new commission was tasked with examining a specific set of questions that new evidence and new methodology had made urgently relevant. The mandate was narrow enough to be politically survivable, but broad enough, if the investigators were serious, to matter enormously. The palace said nothing. And if you have been paying attention to how the British royal family communicates, you already know that silence from the palace is never actually silence. It is a statement. It is a position. It is a decision made by people who understand, with extraordinary precision, that what you choose not to say can be just as powerful as anything you put in a press release. The institution had spent 27 years refusing to admit there were questions worth asking, and it was not about to change that position now. Think about what that silence communicated to the people watching closely. It communicated that the palace considered formal engagement a concession it was unwilling to make. It communicated that acknowledging the commission meant granting it legitimacy. And legitimacy was the one thing the institution could not afford to give. And it communicated that someone very senior had made that calculation and enforced it with enough authority that not one person inside the institution broke ranks. Not one background briefing, not one carefully placed quote from an unnamed source. Total, coordinated, suffocating silence. Outside the institution, the reaction was entirely different. Among those who had been closest to Diana in the final years of her life, people now scattered across several continents and several decades of changed circumstances, the news traveled through a network that had never fully dissolved. Some had given testimony before, Some had spoken quietly to journalists over the years. Some had stayed completely silent for reasons they had never publicly explained, carrying what they knew the way people carry things that are too heavy to put down and too dangerous to ever show. What they shared when they began speaking cautiously in the weeks after the commission was announced was a reaction that mixed relief with something that felt much closer to dread. Relief because the questions they had carried for nearly 3 decades might finally receive the kind of institutional attention they deserved. The kind of attention that comes with subpoena power, forensic laboratories, and the formal weight of 2 governments standing behind it. But dread because they understood from painful personal experience that a formally authorized investigation is also a formally controlled one. Paul Burrell, Diana's former butler, and the person outside her family who knew her most intimately in her final years, gave an interview to a British publication in April of 2025. He chose his words with the precision of someone who had spent years navigating conversations where every single word carries consequences. He said Diana had always known her story would not end quietly. He said she had told him more than once that there were people who would never allow the full truth to emerge because the full truth would cost them everything. That interview landed like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples moved outward immediately. Within 48 hours, it had been picked up by media outlets across Europe, North America, and Australia. Within a week, it had generated the first and only public comment the palace made about the commission for months. And that response said absolutely nothing. It acknowledged nothing, confirmed nothing, and denied nothing. It was a masterpiece of institutional non-communication that told the watching world precisely everything it needed to know. Because here is what you need to understand about this moment and why it matters so deeply. The commission was framed carefully as a procedural review, a technical reassessment, a responsible application of new forensic tools to old and settled evidence. The people who authorized it went to considerable lengths to describe it in language that was dry, measured, and deliberately undramatic. But underneath that careful language, something genuinely extraordinary was happening. For the first time in 27 years, the official conclusions about how Diana died were being formally questioned by the very governments that had originally produced those conclusions. And that, regardless of how it was packaged and presented to the public, was an admission. Not a loud one, not a public one, but an admission nonetheless. An admission that the questions had never gone away. An admission that the evidence had never been fully exhausted. And an admission that somewhere in the gap between what the official record said and what the evidence actually showed, there was something that still needed to be explained. Something that had been waiting, buried and patient, for 27 years. Stay with me. Because what the commission found when it began looking is where this story becomes something that no official report, no matter how carefully worded, will ever be able to fully contain. What the investigation actually revealed. Let us be precise about what the commission was working with. When it began its formal examination in the autumn of 2025, it had access to physical evidence that had been held in secure French judicial storage for nearly 3 decades. It had access to toxicological samples, photographic documentation, witness statements, and technical reports that had formed the backbone of the original French investigation and the subsequent British inquiry. And it had something the original investigators did not have: the forensic technology of 2025, which is a different instrument entirely from anything that existed in 1997. The first area the commission examined was the toxicological record relating to Henri Paul, the driver of the Mercedes that crashed in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. The original French investigation had concluded that Henri Paul had a blood alcohol level of approximately 1.75 grams per liter at the time of the crash, more than 3 times the legal limit for driving in France. That finding had been central to the narrative of the official record for 27 years. It was the foundation upon which the conclusion of grossly negligent driving had been built. And it was the first thing the new forensic panel looked at, with fresh eyes and new tools. What they found when they looked at that toxicological record was not a clean confirmation of the original findings. It was a series of questions that the original findings had never been required to answer. The blood samples attributed to Henri Paul had been drawn under circumstances that the Commission's forensic experts described in their preliminary briefing documents as procedurally irregular. The chain of custody for those samples, meaning the documented trail of who handled them, when, and under what conditions from the moment they were collected to the moment they were tested, contained gaps, not enormous gaps, not gaps that proved anything on their own, but gaps that, in the language of modern forensic science, were significant enough to require explanation. The Commission brought in 3 independent toxicologists, 1 British, 1 French, and 1 from the Netherlands, none of whom had any prior involvement with the Diana case. Their task was to review the original toxicological findings using current analytical standards and to assess whether those findings were consistent with the physical evidence as a whole. Their conclusions, delivered to the Commission in November of 2025, did not exonerate Henri Paul, but they raised serious and specific doubts about whether the blood alcohol reading attributed to him accurately reflected his actual state at the time of the crash. Those doubts have never been publicly aired before, in any official context. There was a second area of examination that the Commission pursued with equal intensity. This was the question of the white Fiat Uno, the vehicle that multiple eyewitnesses reported seeing in the tunnel at the time of the crash. A vehicle that made contact with the Mercedes before it struck the 13th pillar of the Pont de l'Alma underpass. The original French investigation had never conclusively identified the driver or owner of that vehicle. Operation Paget, the British inquiry, had reviewed the French findings and reached the same conclusion. After nearly 3 decades, the white Fiat Uno remained one of the most significant unresolved questions in the entire case. The Commission's investigators used vehicle paint analysis technology developed in the intervening years to re-examine paint transfer evidence recovered from the wreckage of the Mercedes. The results were specific in ways the original analysis had not been capable of achieving. The paint matched a particular production run of Fiat Uno vehicles manufactured between 1983 and 1987 and finished in a specific shade of white used by Fiat during that period. That narrowed the field considerably. What the investigators then found, buried in French police records from 1997 that had never been fully cross-referenced with British inquiry documents, was a reference to a vehicle matching that exact description that had been reported abandoned in a Paris suburb within 72 hours of the crash. That vehicle had been examined briefly by French authorities in September of 1997 and then released. The records of that examination were sparse, amounting to fewer than 3 pages of documentation for a vehicle that should have been one of the most intensively scrutinized pieces of physical evidence in the entire investigation. The Commission's investigators described the brevity of that examination in formal language that was clearly chosen with care as difficult to reconcile with standard investigative procedure. 4 words that, in the context of this case and everything surrounding it, carry an enormous amount of weight. The third area of examination concerned the cameras. The Pont de l'Alma tunnel and the route leading to it were covered by a series of closed-circuit television cameras operated by various French authorities in August of 1997. The original investigation had established that the majority of those cameras had not been recording at the time of the crash, or that their footage had not been preserved. The Commission went back to the technical records relating to those camera systems with a specific question. Was the absence of footage the result of routine system failures? Or was there a pattern to which cameras were functioning, and which were not that warranted closer examination? What the technical analysts found was not proof of deliberate interference. It is important to be precise about that, because precision is what separates a serious examination of this case from the kind of speculation that has surrounded it for decades. What they found was a pattern of non-functionality that was statistically unusual given the known operational history of the camera systems involved. Several cameras that covered the most critical sections of the route taken by the Mercedes that night were among those with no recorded footage. The probability of that specific combination of failures occurring simultaneously by chance was assessed by the Commission's technical analysts as low, not impossible, but low enough to require explanation. Now, I want you to sit with that for a moment. Because the Commission was not trafficking in conspiracy theories. These were forensic scientists, toxicologists, vehicle analysts, and technical experts operating under the formal authority of two governments. And what they were saying, in the careful and measured language of official inquiry, was that the physical evidence surrounding Diana's death contained anomalies that the original investigations had not resolved, and that 27 years of official silence had done nothing to explain. That is not a tabloid claim. That is a formal finding, and it changes the entire landscape of this conversation. The experts involved in the commission came from institutions with reputations built over decades. They had nothing to gain from sensationalism and everything to lose from findings that could not withstand scrutiny. When they submitted their preliminary report to the Joint Commission in December of 2025, they were careful to frame their conclusions as findings that required further investigation rather than findings that proved a particular outcome. But the questions those findings pointed toward were not small questions. They were not peripheral questions. They were questions that went directly to the heart of what happened in that tunnel on the 31st of August, 1997. And here is the detail that has stayed with every journalist, every legal expert, and every forensic analyst who has reviewed the Commission's preliminary findings. The anomalies were not random. They were not scattered evenly across the evidence. They clustered. They clustered around the same points in the timeline, the same pieces of physical evidence, and the same institutional decisions made in the hours and days immediately following the crash. And when anomalies cluster in an investigation, there are only two possible explanations. Either an extraordinary sequence of unrelated failures and coincidences occurred simultaneously on the same night in the same tunnel involving the same vehicle, or something else happened. Something that the official record for 27 years has declined to name. Stay with me. Because Diana knew something was coming. She said so herself. And the documents that prove it have just resurfaced for the first time. The secrets Diana took with her. There is a letter that Diana wrote in October of 1993, almost 4 years before she died. It was written by hand on her personal stationery and addressed to her butler, Paul Burrell. In that letter, she described a fear so specific, so detailed, and so chillingly prescient that when it resurfaced during the Commission's document review in January of 2026, the investigators who read it sat in silence for a long moment before anyone spoke. The letter did not speak in generalities. It named a method, it named a context, and it described, with uncomfortable precision, exactly the kind of death that would come for her less than 4 years later. The letter had been in Burrell's possession for years. He had referenced it publicly before, most notably during the 2002 trial at which he was acquitted of stealing Diana's possessions. But the full contents of that letter had never been formally entered into any official inquiry record. Operation Paja had reviewed a version of it. The original French investigation had not seen it at all. The Joint Commission, working in January of 2026, obtained the complete original document for the first time and subjected it to full forensic and linguistic analysis. What that analysis confirmed was that the letter was authentic, unaltered, and written entirely in Diana's own hand. The relevant passage, which has now been reviewed by the Commission and reported on by multiple serious journalists, described Diana's belief that there were people around her, people with access to power and resources, who considered her continued public influence a problem that needed to be permanently resolved. She did not use the word killed. She was more precise than that, and more devastating. She wrote that she believed an accident would be arranged, and that it would involve her car. She wrote that she was not being dramatic. She wrote that she was being practical about what she knew and who she knew it about. Now, pause here. Because Diana wrote those words in 1993, the crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel happened in 1997, 4 years separated the writing of that letter from the night it described, and in those 4 years, Diana did not destroy the letter, did not retract it, did not tell Burrell she had been wrong or frightened or irrational. She left it exactly where it was, in the hands of the one person she trusted most, as if she understood that one day it would need to be found by someone who knew what to do with it. The commission also reviewed a series of recorded testimonies that had been given privately over the years by people in Diana's inner circle, recordings that had circulated among journalists and legal researchers but had never been formally authenticated or entered into any official record. The process of authenticating those recordings took the commission's audio forensic specialists the better part of 6 weeks. What they concluded was that the recordings were genuine, that they had not been edited or manipulated, and that they contained statements from Diana herself that directly contradicted several elements of the official narrative surrounding her final months. One of those recordings, made in 1996 during a private session with a close confidant whose identity the commission has protected, contains Diana speaking about the British security services in terms that are specific enough to have made the commission's legal advisors extremely uncomfortable. She does not accuse anyone of a specific act. She is more careful than that, and her carefulness in that recording is itself revealing. She speaks about surveillance. She speaks about telephone interceptions. She speaks about feeling watched in ways that went beyond the ordinary intrusion of press photographers and royal protection officers. She speaks about it the way someone speaks about something they have confirmed rather than something they merely suspect. The significance of that recording cannot be overstated, because in the years since Diana's death, the existence of surveillance operations targeting senior members of the royal household during the 1990s has been partially confirmed through documents released under Freedom of Information legislation. We now know that communications involving members of the royal family were intercepted during that period. We know that the intelligence apparatus of the British state was actively involved in monitoring individuals connected to the royal household. What we do not know, and what the commission's findings make it impossible to continue ignoring, is exactly who was being watched, what was found, and what was done with that information. Diana had also, in the final year of her life, begun assembling something that the people around her described as a private archive. Not a formal collection of documents, but a deliberate gathering of materials, letters, records, and personal notes that she considered important enough to preserve carefully. Several people in her circle knew about this archive. None of them knew its full contents. What they knew was that Diana took it seriously, that she had made arrangements for its safekeeping, and that she had told at least 2 people separately that if anything happened to her, the archive would explain things that she had not been able to say publicly while she was alive. That archive became one of the most contested elements of the legal proceedings following Diana's death. Paul Burrell's trial in 2002 centered in part on accusations that items had been removed from Diana's estate without authorization. The trial collapsed dramatically when Queen Elizabeth II revealed that Burrell had told her he was keeping certain items for safekeeping, a revelation that came so late and so suddenly that it raised its own serious questions about why it had not been disclosed earlier. What the commission found when it reviewed the complete record of what had been recovered from Diana's personal effects was that the archive as described by people in her circle was not fully accounted for in the official inventory of her estate. Items were missing, not in a vague or ambiguous sense. Specifically described items, referenced in witness statements given by people who had seen them, were absent from the official record of what was recovered. The commission's investigators spent considerable time trying to establish where those items had gone and when they had disappeared from the record. What they established was that the gap between what witnesses described seeing and what the official inventory recorded was not the result of poor documentation or administrative error. The discrepancy was too specific and too consistent across multiple independent witness accounts to be explained that way. And then there were the photographs. In the weeks before Diana died, she had been photographed extensively, as she always was. But among those photographs, according to sources close to the commission, were images taken by Diana herself on a personal camera. Images that documented meetings, people, and situations that she considered significant enough to record privately. Those photographs were referenced in at least one witness statement given to Operation Paget. They did not appear in the Commission's review of physical evidence recovered from Diana's estate. Where they went, who took them, and what they showed are questions the Commission raised formally and explicitly in its preliminary findings. What Diana knew, what she recorded, what she preserved, and what subsequently disappeared from the official record forms, a pattern that is impossible to look at without feeling the weight of its implications. She was not a passive figure in the final years of her life. She was an active one. She was gathering information, making records, and taking deliberate steps to ensure that what she knew would survive her if she did not. The fact that so much of what she gathered has since disappeared from any official accounting is not a footnote to this story. It is one of its central facts, and the people who were supposed to be asking these questions 27 years ago did not ask them. The people who are asking them now, formally, officially, and with the authority of two governments behind them, are finding answers that the establishment has spent nearly 3 decades working very hard to make sure nobody ever found. Stay with me. Because when those findings became public, the response from the palace and the broader British establishment revealed something just as important as the findings themselves. The establishment strikes back. When the Commission's preliminary findings began leaking into the public domain in January of 2026, the response from the British establishment did not come all at once. It came in stages, each one more revealing than the last, each one demonstrating with uncomfortable clarity that the people managing the response were less concerned with the truth than with the consequences of the truth becoming impossible to ignore. The first stage was dismissal. Senior figures with connections to the original investigations began appearing in sympathetic media outlets to explain, patiently and condescendingly, why the Commission's findings were not as significant as they appeared. The language used in those early dismissals was telling in its consistency. Words like re-examination and reassessment were replaced with words like reopening old wounds and relitigating settled conclusions. The shift was deliberate. Framing the Commission's work as an act of cruelty toward Diana's sons rather than an act of justice toward Diana herself was a strategy. And it was deployed across multiple platforms simultaneously with a coordination that does not happen by accident. When you see that level of messaging consistency across outlets that do not normally coordinate, you are watching an operation, not a reaction. The palace maintained its public silence, but its private activity told a very different story. Multiple journalists covering the Commission reported that they had received calls from individuals identifying themselves as speaking on behalf of senior royal household staff. Calls that did not offer information, but asked pointed questions about what the journalists knew, who their sources were, and when they intended to publish. Those calls were not reported as threats. They were reported as inquiries. But in the culture of royal press relations, an inquiry from the palace about what you know and when you plan to say it carries a meaning that every experienced royal correspondent understands immediately. The British government's response operated on a parallel track. Ministers asked directly about the Commission's findings in parliamentary sessions, gave answers that were technically accurate and substantively empty, acknowledging the Commission's existence while refusing to engage with any of its specific findings. The Home Secretary pressed repeatedly on the question of the surveillance records identified by the Commission, gave an answer in February of 2026 that managed to use 147 words to say absolutely nothing. That answer was not incompetence, it was architecture. It was a structure built specifically to give the appearance of engagement while ensuring that nothing of substance was actually said. The voices that were amplified during this period were the voices of former investigators, retired intelligence figures, and establishment loyalists who had been making the same arguments for 27 years, and whose continued prominence in the conversation was itself a form of narrative management. Every time one of those voices appeared on a major broadcast platform to explain why the Commission's findings should not be taken seriously, the platforms that might have given equal time to the Commission's own experts and to Diana's former associates somehow found reasons not to do so. The imbalance was not accidental, and it was not subtle. The voices that were quietly sidelined were the ones with the most direct knowledge. Legal representatives acting on behalf of Diana's former associates found that media requests for their clients dried up almost immediately after the Commission's findings began circulating. Journalists who had been pursuing the forensic anomalies identified by the Commission reported pressure from editors who had received calls from individuals they declined to identify. One senior correspondent at a major British publication wrote privately to colleagues in a message that subsequently became public that she had been told explicitly by her editor that the Diana Commission was not a story the publication would be covering in depth. She did not stay at that publication much longer. What the establishment's response revealed, more clearly than any of the Commission's forensic findings, was the architecture of protection that had surrounded this case for 27 years. It revealed that the people with the most to lose from a full accounting were still in positions powerful enough to shape what the public was allowed to hear. It revealed that the machinery built to manage this story in 1997 had never been dismantled. It had simply been placed in standby mode, waiting for exactly this moment. And when that moment came, it activated with a speed and a coordination that told you everything about how seriously the findings were being taken behind closed doors. Because here is the truth that the establishment's response made undeniable. You do not deploy that level of resource, that level of coordination, and that level of sustained narrative management against findings that do not matter. You do not make those calls, apply that pressure, and activate those relationships to suppress a story that poses no threat. The intensity of the response was itself a confession, and the people watching it most closely, the journalists, the legal experts, the former associates of Diana, who had spent decades being told they were wrong to keep asking, understood exactly what that confession meant. Why this story refuses to die. There is a question that sits underneath everything the Commission found, underneath every forensic anomaly and every missing document, and every carefully managed non-answer from every official spokesperson. It is not a complicated question. It is, in fact, the simplest question in this entire story. If the official version of events is true, why has it required this much protection for this long? Truth does not generally need an apparatus. Truth does not generally require coordinated messaging campaigns and quiet calls to editors and parliamentary answers engineered to say nothing. Truth, in most circumstances, is its own defense. It is the things that are not true that need defending this aggressively. The Commission's findings did not prove a conspiracy in the legal sense of that word. It is important to say that clearly and to mean it. What they proved was something that, in some ways, is even more significant. They proved that the official investigation into Diana's death was incomplete. They proved that evidence existed which had not been fully examined, that questions had been raised which had not been fully answered, and that the apparatus of the British state had, at various points in the 27 years since Diana died, actively worked to ensure that those questions remained unanswered. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is a documented finding of a formal commission operating under the authority of two governments. The impact of those findings on public trust in the British monarchy has been immediate and measurable. Polling conducted in February of 2026, in the weeks immediately following the first wave of reporting on the Commission's preliminary findings, showed that public confidence in the monarchy's honesty and transparency had fallen to its lowest recorded level since the days immediately following Diana's death in 1997. That number is not a coincidence. It is a recognition, expressed through the blunt instrument of a polling question, that the British public has understood something that the establishment has spent 27 years trying to prevent them from understanding. The institution they were asked to trust with the truth did not tell them the truth. William and Harry have both maintained public silence about the Commission. That silence, in both cases, almost certainly reflects legal advice rather than personal preference. But sources close to both men have indicated that the Commission's findings have been received within their private circles, with a gravity that goes well beyond the usual royal discretion around sensitive matters. Harry, in particular, who has spent years making public his belief that the full truth about his mother's death has never been told, is understood by those close to him to regard the Commission's preliminary findings as a confirmation of things he has believed for a very long time. Diana's enduring hold on the world's imagination is not, at its core, a product of sentimentality. It is a product of unfinished business. People do not stay attached to stories that have ended. They stay attached to stories that have not. And Diana's story has never ended. Not because the world cannot let go, but because the world has been given no honest conclusion to let go of. Every official report, every public inquiry, every parliamentary answer has offered closure without actually providing it, resolution on paper that has never resolved anything in reality. And people, in their instincts and their bones, know the difference. What justice looks like in this context is not a simple question. The people most directly responsible for whatever happened in that tunnel, whether through action, negligence, or the deliberate suppression of evidence afterward, are in most cases no longer alive to be held accountable in any conventional sense. The institutions that protected the official narrative for 27 years are still standing, still powerful, and still deeply invested in ensuring that the full truth never receives the formal acknowledgement it deserves. Justice, in this context, may look less like a courtroom verdict and more like an honest reckoning, a moment at which the institutions involved are required to stand before the historical record and account for what they did and what they chose not to do. That reckoning has not yet arrived. The Commission's preliminary findings are exactly that. Preliminary. The full report is expected later in 2026. And the people who have followed this case most closely are under no illusions about the forces that will be working to ensure that report is as limited, as qualified, and as inconclusive as it is possible for a formal document to be while still technically fulfilling its mandate. But something has changed that cannot be unchanged. The findings are on the record now. The anomalies have been formally documented. The missing evidence has been formally noted. And the establishment's response has been formally observed by enough serious people that it cannot simply be erased. Diana once said that she would not go quietly. She was right. 27 years after they buried her, she is still speaking. And for the first time in all those years, there are people in positions of formal authority who are finally, imperfectly, and under enormous pressure, beginning to listen. Diana's story was never meant to be reopened. The people who closed it counted on the world moving on. The world did not move on. If this video made you think differently about what you were told, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, because this story is far from over.